With just an injection of a bizarre fusion agent, the man was shocked to discover that the skin around his wound was healing at an astonishing speed. Watching the scar disappear without a trace, the man thought his experiment had finally succeeded. But just as he was about to laugh in celebration, he was horrified to realize his mouth was gone. This is Grafted, New Zealand's latest thrilling horror hit of 2024. Upon its release, the film grossed an impressive $4.3 billion and secured 9 nominations at the New Zealand Film Festival. The movie opens with a man who is a renowned medical expert from Thailand. Since childhood, he had struggled with low self-esteem due to a dark birthmark on his face. Determined to erase it, he devoted his life to studying medicine, eventually becoming a top medical professor. After years of research, he developed a groundbreaking skin repair serum. Just a single drop could rapidly heal a wound, restoring flawless skin without any scarring. Eager to rid himself of his birthmark, he bypassed clinical trials and injected the serum into himself. At first, everything seemed normal. The birthmark vanished. Believing he had succeeded, he was overcome with joy. But then, the nightmare began. The serum didn't stop at repairing his skin. It kept growing. His mouth and nose fused together. Panicked, he grabbed a knife to cut open his skin, but the serum's regenerative power was too strong. It sealed up instantly. In the end, he suffocated to death, trapped in his own flesh. His young daughter, Wei, stumbled upon her father's lifeless body. Frozen in shock, she picked up his research notes and silently vowed to complete his life's work. It turned out their family carried a hereditary birthmark. Her father's was on his face, while Wei's was on her cheek. His ultimate goal had not only been to cure himself, but also to give his daughter a chance at a normal, happy childhood. 5 long years passed. Driven by her promise and relentless hard work, Wei earned a spot at a prestigious medical university in Singapore. Awarded a scholarship, she eagerly moved to Singapore, staying with her aunt for convenience. However, her cousin Angela was far from welcoming. When she noticed the birthmark on Wei's cheek, her disdain grew even more apparent. Already insecure, Wei felt even more self-conscious under Angela's gaze. Seeing homeless people on the street reminded Wei of her own struggle. She swore to work even harder, to complete her father's research and change her fate. The very next morning, Wei rushed to campus to register. Her outstanding academic record quickly caught the attention of Paul, a respected PhD in the medical field. Impressed, Paul made an exception and invited Wei to join his research lab. Thrilled by the recognition, Wei felt her hard work was finally paying off. She shared her father's research notebook with Paul, hoping to continue the experiments during her university years. Upon learning Wei wanted to study skin-repairing gene molecular technology, Paul was a little surprised. He agreed to support her research, but only under his strict supervision. Wei assumed Paul was merely concerned about safety. What she didn't realize was that from the moment he saw her father's notes, Paul had already set his sights on her work. Over the following months, Wei juggled her studies and lab work. After half a year of effort, she finally synthesized the repair serum. Eager to see the results, she tested the serum on a piece of pork, but the serum failed to work. Disappointed, Wei felt a wave of frustration. While she was racking her brain, trying to figure out what had gone wrong, a girl suddenly entered the lab. Her name was Jasmine, a new freshman that year. Jasmine's academic performance was even better than Wei's, and Paul, always on the lookout for talent, brought her into the lab as well. After just a few days in the lab, Jasmine identified the problem. It turned out that during her previous experiments, Wei had been using animal repair cells. While animal cells did have regenerative abilities, their effects were slow and required a significant amount of time. Jasmine suggested trying plant cells instead. Plants, when wounded, could rapidly heal themselves. This could potentially make up for the shortcomings of animal cells. Hearing Jasmine's proposal, Wei found it reasonable. After digging through research materials, Wei discovered a plant called the corpse amorphophallus, whose cells could rapidly repair damaged tissue. By coincidence, there was one growing in the university's botanical garden. Under the cover of night, Wei snuck into the garden. The plant happened to be in its blooming phase, making its cells especially active. Wei harvested some flower stalk tissue. Back in the lab, she crushed the flower stalk and mixed it with other compounds to create a new formula. Once the formula was complete, Wei couldn't wait. She took a knife and slashed her thigh. To her astonishment, the wound began to heal right before her eyes. Overwhelmed with excitement, Wei shouted with joy. However, she failed to notice that Paul and senior student Eve were in the office next door. Hearing Wei's ecstatic voice, Paul realized her experiment had succeeded. Leaving Eve behind, he rushed into the lab. Wei eagerly showed Paul the healed wound, but their body language appeared a little too intimate. From outside, Eve misinterpreted the scene, thinking Wei and Paul were having an affair. Quietly, she snapped a photo with her phone. Paul told Wei to head home for now, promising that he would submit a request to the university for the next phase of clinical trials the following day. If the trials succeeded, the serum could finally be used on humans. Overwhelmed with excitement, Wei forgetting her father's research notebook on the desk. Noticing it, Paul took out his phone and secretly photographed every page. Unaware of this, Wei thought everything was progressing smoothly and awaited Paul's call. But instead of hearing from Paul, Eve showed up at her door. Eve had always wanted to join Paul's research lab, but her mediocre academic performance made her unqualified. In order to get Paul's recommendation, Eve sold her body. Eve thought Wei entered Paul's laboratory by selling her body, so she threatened Wei with the photo, hoping that she would leave the laboratory voluntarily. She mocked Wei's birthmark, calling her an ugly duckling. Hurt and humiliated, Wei was devastated. But for the sake of continuing her research, she endured it in silence. When she returned home, however, she was met with an even bigger shock. Her father's memorial altar had been dismantled. It turned out that Eve, in order to force Wei to quit the lab, had actually sent that photo to their classmates. Angela had always been extremely jealous of Wei's academic performance. When she found out that Wei had gotten into the lab by trading her body, her jealousy turned into rage. Angela immediately snapped, going into a full-blown meltdown. Angela insults pushed an already frustrated Wei to the edge, and the two started brawling in the room. In the chaos, Wei's hand landed on a bamboo skewer on the floor. When she came back to her senses, Angela was already dead. Staring at Angela's lifeless body on the ground, Wei thought about her experiment. She had never tested it on human skin before. With that thought, Wei picked up a scalpel and cut open her own face. Then, she skinned Angela's face and injected her experimental serum into the harvested skin. After enduring excruciating pain, Wei was shocked to discover that Angela's skin had fused seamlessly with her own. Looking at her new face, free of the birthmark that had haunted her, Wei was stunned. Just then, her aunt, who had been out, returned home. Panicked, Wei quickly hid Angela's body. She found Angela's clothes and disguised herself as her. Her aunt didn't notice anything unusual and mentioned she would be going to Europe for half a month, asking her daughter to take care of Wei while she was away. Hearing her aunt's concern made Wei feel a little guilty, but looking at her reflection in the mirror, excitement overwhelmed her guilt. To avoid raising any suspicion among her classmates, Wei began mimicking Eve's every move. She went even further. Wei seduced and took over Angela's boyfriend. But just as Wei was getting intimate with him, he suddenly noticed a wound forming on her forehead. The horrifying sight scared the man. He stumbled backward in panic, accidentally falling off a cliff to his death. Terrified, Wei rushed home wearing Angela's face. She re-injected the serum into her skin, and the fusion was restored. It turned out that Wei's experiment wasn't truly a success. Although the skin could fuse temporarily, it had a time limit. Every few days, another injection was required. Without it, the dead skin would begin to rot and peel off. Wei tried to check her research notes, but after searching for a long time, she realized they were missing. Thinking of her advisor Paul, she called to ask if he had seen the notes. To her shock, Paul admitted he had taken the notes, and he intended to steal her research for himself. Hearing her arrogant advisor gloat, Wei finally realized she had been tricked. As she wrestled with how to retrieve her notes, she noticed Eve's car parked downstairs. Seeing the beautiful Eve gave Wei an idea. Disguised as Angela, she approached the real Eve, claiming she had left something at home and needed a ride back. Eve didn't suspect anything and drove Wei home. As soon as they stepped inside, Wei locked the door. By this time, her skin was reaching its limit. She grabbed a metal rod and swung it at Eve. Eve, realizing the danger, managed to escape. She fled to the pool, hoping to hide, but Wei noticed the ripples in the water. She picked up a power drill. After killing Eve, Wei peeled off her face and wore it. Posing as Eve, she visited Paul. Paul, unaware he was now dealing with an imposter, used Wei's formula to successfully fuse animal skin in his experiments. An excited Paul takes out an object from the cabinet to celebrate with Eve. However, Paul doesn't notice that Wei secretly opens the cabinet while he goes upstairs to get tools. But Wei doesn't find the notebook in the cabinet, only discovering Paul's newly synthesized serum. With Eve's face becoming unsustainable, Wei temporarily leaves Paul's house with the serum. Returning home, Wei attempts to inject the serum into Eve's face. Unexpectedly, the professor's serum proves useless. Eve's skin can no longer fuse with Wei's face. Seeing the birthmark reappear, Wei becomes completely distraught. Turning around, she discovers Paul has actually come to her home. It turns out Paul already sensed something wrong with Eve. He secretly followed Wei to observe the serum's side effects, discovering the skin fusion only works temporarily. He wanted Wei to be his experimental subject. As a condition, he could find a way to cure Wei, but the prerequisite was that the research results must be his own. To restore her appearance, Wei reluctantly agrees. Just as Paul grows smug, Wei secretly pulls out a syringe. The unlucky Paul collapses motionless on the floor. Yet Wei shows no mercy. She prepares new serum at home and actually uses Paul for experimentation. But the improved formula still fails, transforming the unfortunate Paul into a fleshy mass after injection. As Wei prepares further experiments, neighbors hear suspicious noises. A neighbor approaches and witnesses the horrific scene, immediately calling police. Seeing authorities arrive, Wei escapes her home. Fleeing to subway stations, she encounters a homeless man. Hiding in his embrace to evade police, Wei accidentally breaks the carried serum vial during concealment. When the serum contacts their skin, Wei begins fusing with the homeless man. This concludes the 2025 horror thriller Grafted. Overall, the film maintains decent quality with its body horror concepts. That's today's content sharing. See you next time.